thank you all for tuning in. And this is the first presentation in a multi-session program called Becoming a Bluebird Watcher. So it's part of our Rangeland Wildlife Education Series here at the Range Cattle REC at the University of Florida, IFAS. And my name is Hans Ellington. I'm an assistant professor at the Range Cattle REC. And working with me on this project is Bethany White. She's a wildlife research biologist here at the center as well. So let's go ahead and dive in. So today we're going to talk about eastern bluebird biology, eastern bluebird ecology, and then we're going to spend some time talking about some nest boxes, and then finally we'll talk about the bluebird research that we're going to be doing here at the Range Cattle REC. And if you hold on just a second with me, I'm going to rearrange the screen here. Well, here in a minute, we'll zoom out and we can show the whole screen so we can see some of the different nest boxes that we got. So now you can see some of the different nest boxes. Thanks, right, so let's go ahead and dive in though and first talk about some bluebird biology. So in here, we're going to cover what a bluebird looks like, what their songs and calls sound like, and we'll then talk about some similar species in North America and then also in Florida. And then we'll cover the nesting or the life cycle of bluebirds from nesting all the way through migration. So this here is the eastern bluebird. This is a male, and bluebirds are part of the thrush family. So that's the same family that the robins are in. But they're about 2/3 the size of a robin, so not quite as big as robins, weigh about an ounce. And one of the neat things about bluebirds is they're sexually dimorphic. So that simply means that the males and females look different. So this is the male, and it's got that bright blue plumage on its back, tails, and wing. And then it's got this nice chestnut patch on the throat and upper chest, and then a white belly. Now, the female bluebird looks different, right? So we've got a blue-gray back with some chestnut on the chest and throat, and all those colors overall are duller and they blend together a bit. Now, the song of the bluebird, and we're going to play a video here so you can see and hear it, low-pitched warbling song. It's got 1 to 3. It can last up to 2 minutes. So I'm going to play this video. Do that with the background noise. Right, so you can, it's neat with the videos because you can not only hear that song, but you actually see the bird singing, right? You see the chest exhaling out that song. And so the bird, I'll play a little bit more of it. So this is the male, if you can tell. It's got that nice brilliant blue plumage on its back and wings. Now it'll sing that song from that high perch, and it's doing that to attract mates, attract females. It's showing off its fitness and how good a caller it is by singing that brilliant song. And it'll sing it from high perches during the breeding season. Now, females will sometimes sing this song as well, but they're usually doing it to indicate that predators are near. Now, bluebirds also have a call. It's sort of a soft pitch, sort of ka-wee sound. It's a fairly short and fast call, lasts about a second or less. Right, so you can hear that call, pretty neat call. What they're doing with the call, bluebirds will use that pretty much year round, and it helps them keep in touch with each other. It signals to the nestlings that the adults are coming back with food, but it's also part of that sort of I'm over here, here I am sort of communication. Now, when bluebirds get too close to each other, bluebirds are territorial when they have a nest. They're going to get a harsh, single harsh sound, tell other bluebirds back off. And then nervous birds, in addition to sometimes having their song, if they see predators, they might make a loud chit sound. So there are other bluebirds in North America. There's the western bluebird, and one of the easiest ways to distinguish the western bluebird from the eastern bluebird is to look at that chestnut patch, right? So that chestnut patch in the eastern bluebird comes all the way up to the throat. However, in the western bluebird, it doesn't come up to the throat. The throat is still blue. That's one of the easiest ways to distinguish these two species. And then there's the mountain bluebird. And you can see the mountain bluebird has no chestnut patch, right? It's all blue on both the belly and chest and the back as well. Now, both of these species, mountain and western bluebirds, occur only in western and midwestern North America. So if you see them in Florida, you should definitely be reporting them to eBird because that would be a pretty rare sighting. So probably not going to see them in Florida. However, in Florida, there are other birds that are blue. And if you guys birders, you've probably seen a lot of these. So the indigo bunting, right? It's about half the size of the eastern bluebird. It has no chestnut patch. It's all blue, and it's a darker, almost blue-black. And it's got this nice, strong, powerful beak, and that's because indigo buntings eat seeds. Bluebirds don't eat seeds very often, if ever. So you've got not only smaller, different coloration, but also a different shaped beak. And then, of course, we've got the blue jay. I'm sure everyone has seen a blue jay before. They've got that nice black and white coloration on the face and the crest, and they're much larger than eastern bluebirds. And then the Florida scrub jay. I'm new to Florida. I only moved down a few weeks ago. So I've never seen a scrub jay, and I really want to see one soon. So they're on my list for sure to see. And then there's purple martins and tree swallows. So these birds in certain light can look blue or purplish. However, they're very different from eastern bluebirds, right? They've got a very different shaped body shape. They're smaller than eastern bluebirds. They also have this really wide beak and mouth. And that's because swallows and martins are catching insects on the fly, right? So they're zooming around, usually at dusk or over bodies of water, and they're opening up this really wide mouth and catching insects mid-air. But swallows and martins are cavity nesters just like bluebirds. So this is actually a purple martin in front of a nest box there on a perch. And then finally, we've got the belted kingfisher here in Florida, really neat bird. You notice the belted kingfisher's got all three of the colors that the bluebird's got. It's got blue, white, and the chestnut, but it's in a very different pattern and configuration. And also, you know, the kingfisher's got this nice crest, and it's got a really large, sharp, and beak. And that beak, the kingfisher is using to catch fish and other things. So let's go back to the eastern bluebird and let's start that life cycle. So if the first thing they've got to be doing, the males, is attracting a mate. And so we already learned one of the ways that males attract females, male bluebirds attract female bluebirds, and that's through their song and singing a loud and clear and nice song to demonstrate their fitness. Well, the other way that they're demonstrating their fitness is the brightness of that blue plumage. And what's neat about bluebirds is not only can they see invisible light like us, but they can also see in ultraviolet. And the brightness of the plumage of bluebirds, that bright blue color, is not only detected in visible light, but also in ultraviolet. And the females are using both to determine the quality of the male. So if that male has bright blue plumage in the visible and ultraviolet spectrum, then the female finds that more attractive. This is coming out of research out of Auburn University. And the other thing that males will do is a courtship display. And that's what this male bluebird is doing here. he's fluttering midair in front of the female. So he's used his song to bring females into his area, his territory. Now he's showing off with that midair fluttering. Now, once a male and female create a pair bond, they're what we call socially monogamous. So that pair bond will last at least through that nesting, and often will last for multiple nestings and can even last multiple years. But the strength of that bond and whether it stays depends a lot on how successful those two bluebirds are at having a nest and raising chicks. If their first nest fails, that pair bond might break. But if it's successful, they might re-nest and might even eventually stay together for the next year. But the other thing about socially monogamous species like bluebirds, and this is actually common in a lot of birds, more common than we ever knew, is that occasionally there's cheating, right? So occasionally that female is going to lay an egg in some other female's nest. And so occasionally bluebirds end up raising young that aren't theirs. And occasionally the male is going to mate with multiple females. So even though he's bonded with this female, he might go to the next door female and she might lay an egg or two that's his in her nest. And that might happen to him too. So occasionally males end up raising young that aren't their own. So across North America, bluebirds can nest anywhere between mid-February and mid-September. And when bluebirds nest is dependent on climate. So down here in Florida, it's going to start early. It's going to start in mid-February. But further north, like say in Ontario, Canada, it's going to start much later in the year because the conditions have to be warm enough for them to begin the nesting season. Now, in places where it is warm, places like Florida, they will re-nest 2 to 3 times a year. However, again, places where it's colder, like Ontario, Canada, they might only nest once. And bluebirds are what we call secondary cavity nesters. And so there's 2 things that are important here, cavity nester and secondary. First, cavity nester just means that bluebirds require cavities to nest in. And so naturally, this is cavities in trees, fence posts, and so cavities in trees are often in dead trees. They can be in alive trees too, and they can be naturally occurring cavities, but typically they're cavities created by things like woodpeckers. And woodpeckers are what we call a primary cavity nester, right? They are capable with their sharp beak to chisel out a hole into a snag or into a tree that they use as a cavity for their nest. Well, in the next year, the bluebird might occupy that nest and raise its young in that nest created the year before or in years prior by woodpeckers. So that's that secondary part. Bluebirds, their beak is not strong enough to create a cavity on their own, so they have to rely on woodpeckers to do it. Now, once the male and female have selected a cavity for their nest, then the female is largely responsible for creating the nest. So she's going to create a cup-shaped nest of twigs, grass, and needles. And then once she's created that nest, she's going to lay 4 to 5 eggs on average. I think the record is maybe 7, and it's been small as well, maybe down to 3. And she'll lay 1 egg a day, usually in the morning, and she will then incubate those eggs for the next 2 weeks or so. All the eggs, when they hatch, about 83% of them do hatch. And that's called our hatching rate. And hatching rate is dependent on a few things. So that 80%, that's the average across North America and across all the nestings. But hatch rate is decreases in later nesting. So it might be 90% in the first nest of the season, and it might be 85% in the second, and it might be 70% in the third. And that's because nesting, the hatch rate is linked with temperature, right? If it's too cold, then not as many eggs hatch, or if it's too warm, not as many eggs hatch. Now, when nestlings are born, like this one freshly hatched, their eyes are sealed shut. They're featherless, they can't move, they can't feed themselves. And that's what we call nutritial, right? Those are animals that are born that cannot move on their own and can't feed themselves or take care of themselves. They require parental care. And the opposite of altricial is precocial. So precocial animals are born able to move around or can move really quickly after being born and are capable of feeding themselves, although they often need direction at least from their adults. So examples of precocial birds are chickens and ducks. So even though bluebirds are born altricial and can't take care of themselves at all, they rapidly develop. So by day 5 or 6, their eyes are opening. And then by day 7 or 8, they can maintain their own body temperature because they've grown enough feathers to maintain their own body temperature. By day 13 and 14, they're fully feathered and capable of short flight. And then around day 17, 18, sometimes 19, they'll leave the nest. They'll fledge out of the nest. However, they do not become fully grown to about 35 to 40 days old. And during that period, they're often posted up in on a high branch in a nearby tree or somewhere. And they're just hanging out there, and the adult bluebirds are still helping provision these fledglings that have left the nest. The fledglings are still learning how to hunt and identify food on their own and still learning the basics of flying and moving around. However, if we're in a place like Florida where bluebirds are going to re-nest, often the 2 to 3 week period where the adult bluebirds are caring for the fledglings out of the nest, that's usually done by the male because the female is re-nesting, starting a new nest. Now, once the end of the breeding season has ended, across most of North America, bluebirds will migrate south. So a lot of the bluebirds through here, they're going to migrate south. So birds that nested up in Ontario, Canada, are going to fly south, perhaps even coming all the way to Florida. So in Florida, we've got a lot of birds from up north that only winter here. But we also have birds in Florida that are year-round residents. So these birds are going to nest right here, and then come winter, they're going to establish a small group, sometimes with mixed species, and they'll spread out from their nesting site. A bit larger of an area they'll move about. And then we also have migrations even in Florida where we've got birds breeding in the panhandle and then coming a bit further south for the winter. So just going to see, it doesn't look like that there's any questions yet on bluebird biology, but if you've got any questions, you can pop them in there. And so any questions about the physical description of bluebirds or their sounds and calls that they can make, or anything about their life cycle. One thing that I did forget to point out is, so they lay these 4 to 5 eggs, usually pale blue, although occasionally the eggs they lay are white. Now, white eggs don't hatch bluebirds that are any different from the pale blue ones, but sometimes the coloration of the eggs is different. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into bluebird ecology here. So far we've been talking about bluebird biology, and we talked about what bluebirds looked like and what they sounded like and their life cycle. And a lot of that has to do, with bluebirds internally, right? But now we're going to talk about how bluebirds interact with their environment and with other species, and that's ecology. So we're going to talk about things like habitat, diet and predation, their distribution and abundance across North America, the threats to bluebirds, and then things that we can do. So habitat is just the landscape features and qualities and resources that an animal needs to persist in an area. And for bluebirds, that basically equates to open country with some trees. Now, historically, in Eastern North America, open country with some trees was likely achieved or realized by forest openings created by beavers or insect outbreaks or naturally occurring wildfire, or even wildfire set by Native Americans. But nowadays, open country with some trees can mean fields and pastures. It can mean roadsides, and it can even mean suburban areas. ultimately, what bluebirds are limited by is nest sites. And so they need nest sites, they're cavity nesters, so they need trees for that. Or they need nest boxes. And they need food. They need food to survive. And so what do bluebirds eat? Well, bluebirds primarily eat during the breeding season, especially insects and all kinds of insects. They eat grasshoppers and crickets. They'll eat beetles. They eat caterpillars. They'll eat spiders. And there's even reports of bluebirds eating small amphibians and reptiles as well. Now, outside of the breeding season, especially further north, if their birds are wintering in, say, Kentucky or Ohio for some reason, they're going to be supplementing their diet in the winter with berries, in the winter and fall with berries. And that's because the insect abundance goes down in colder climates in the winter. Now, eastern bluebirds are what we call a sit and wait predator. So they're going to be perched up on a tree branch or a wire or a fence post, and they're going to be scanning the ground in front of them. They can usually see about 60 feet in front of them, 60 feet away for the insect. And they're going to sit and wait till they spot an insect they want to get, and they're going to flutter down quickly to the ground and grab that insect. So they're not capturing insects out of the air, but they are capturing them on the ground. And so one of the other requirements for bluebirds is something to perch on to hunt insects from. Now, when bluebirds are on their nest and the eggs and the nestling, there's lots of different predators. There are predators that are actively seeking out nests, things like snakes and raccoons and house cats that'll consume nestlings and eggs. And then there's species like squirrels and mice and chipmunks that will be looking for cavities to occupy themselves. And if they find a bluebird nest in a cavity that they want to occupy, they'll pick those bluebirds out and often consume, or nestlings out as well, and then occupy the space. And there's also bird species that will pick out other bluebirds. So things like starlings and house sparrows are also cavity nesters, and they'll take over bluebird nests and kill or push the bluebirds out of that nest. Now, as adults, bluebirds do face predation from things like house cats and avian predators like kestrels and other birds of prey. So talk a little bit about the distribution and abundance of bluebirds. So by distribution, we just mean where in North America they occur, and by abundance, we're meaning how many there are. So historically, so prior to European colonization, we're not really sure what the distribution of eastern bluebirds were, but it was probably something like this, maybe a bit more restricted, but it would have been patchily distributed, right? Because especially east of the Mississippi, large parts of eastern North America were closed forests that only really had openings that were created by fevers or insect outbreaks or wildfire. And so bluebirds would have been restricted to those openings wherever they occurred. Now, after Europeans colonized North America, they landed, as we know, on the East Coast, and they were cutting down the forest for timber production and to create agricultural fields and pastures for livestock. And these conditions really created the sort of perfect habitat for bluebirds. So in the 1800s and even into the early 1900s, bluebirds were experiencing a population boom. There's a lot more bluebirds on the landscape than there was probably historically during this time period. However, these good times did end, and bluebirds begins experiencing a population crash. So the numbers were declining and the distribution was retracting or becoming more patchily distributed again. And there's a couple of important drivers of that. And one is the settlers that were originally clearing this land along the East Coast especially, this land isn't as high quality in terms of pasture and agriculture as this part of it. So a lot of the fields reverted back to closed forest, and they were no longer suitable habitat for eastern bluebirds. At the same time, eastern bluebirds started experiencing a lot of competition from introduced species like starlings and house sparrows. The starlings and house sparrows outcompete bluebirds for cavities and are very aggressive towards bluebirds. And so the numbers were declining. And then finally, and this was especially along the East Coast as well, is urbanization. Converted natural land cover to urbanized land cover that wasn't really suitable as bluebird habitat anymore. However, people began noticing in the 60s and 70s that bluebirds are becoming rarer on the landscape. And a couple of pioneering individuals figured out that we can develop nest boxes and remove that limitation, provide cavities, basically, using those nest boxes for bluebirds. And so through the work of these individuals across North America and several organizations like the North American Bluebird Society, I think, which was started in the late 70s, and then later organizations like the Florida Bluebird Society, through these organizations and the individuals involved in their hard work, putting up nest boxes and nest box trails, the population of bluebirds began to rebound and recover. And it's been steadily increasing since the 60s and 70s. Despite that, and despite population increases even in Florida, especially in the Panhandle and north of Tampa, there are lots of threats to bluebirds in Florida. And one of the primary threats to bluebirds and a lot of other wildlife in Florida is urbanization. So urbanization takes natural or semi-natural land like rangeland and pasture and fields and converts it into residential and commercial properties. And the reason this is such a threat in Florida is that the human population in Florida is growing rapidly. And that rapid population growth of humans in Florida is leading to rapid urbanization of Florida. The other big challenge for bluebirds and a lot of other species in Florida is climate change. But for bluebirds, the ultimate threat there is warmer springs and summers. So hotter springs or summers lead to hotter nest boxes and hotter cavities, and leads to lower hatch rates and fewer bluebirds being added to the population. Now, bluebirds continue to compete with invasives like the house sparrow and the European starling. And then locally, pesticide use can be a threat to bluebirds, not only because it bioaccumulates in some types bioaccumulate in bluebirds, but also pesticide use in general and other human actions that reduce insect availability, remove a food source for bluebirds. So what are some of the important things? I am just seeing that. I'll try to move a little less or do my microphone a little bit. All right, I'll try to move a little less. Sorry about that. So what can we do? Well, the biggest thing that we can do for bluebirds is to set out nest boxes or nest box trails. And what this is doing is basically removing one of the limiting factors for bluebirds, right? It's providing a cavity for bluebirds to live in. So as long as or to raise their young and have a nest in. So as long as there's still a food source in the area, and as long as there's still something for them to perch from and hunt those insects, providing a nest box relieves some of the pressure or a nest box trail. Now, if you are putting out nest boxes, and if you are an avid birder and getting out there and looking and seeing birds, be sure to report your data to eBird and to NestWatch. These programs are ways that scientists can collect data over really large spatial scales and over long time periods, and we can get a lot of interesting information about bird distribution and abundance and survival for these type programs. And then finally, if you have a house cat, keep it indoors, right? Even a well-fed house cat, if outside, will hunt and kill other wildlife. Now, if you're a property manager and you've got some pasture or some agricultural fields or some native rangeland, you can have certain management strategies, usually part of especially in Florida, part of a prescribed burning management plan that will promote clear ground by removing understory and midstory plants And then also, so removing the understory and midstory plants opens up the ground cover a bit more and lets insectivorous birds, birds that eat insects like bluebirds, have a bit easier time finding and capturing insect prey. And then also management plans that promote snags, which are dead standing trees. That ensures that there are natural cavities available for both primary and secondary cavity nesters. And then if you've got old fence posts, old wooden fence posts, keep those up. And even if you're replacing them with metal posts, because those old fence posts can be perfect material for primary and secondary cavity nesters. Now also, again, try to limit the use of pesticides on your property. Pesticides kill the insects that bluebirds and other birds eat, and they can also bioaccumulate. So just gonna do another question check here. Make sure I'm not moving around. Okay. So before, I'll probably move around a little bit. So I'm gonna see if I can pull the microphone off my face a little bit. Maybe that won't brush as much. So we're going to switch gears now and talk about some of the nest boxes. So there's lots of different nest boxes out there, but not all nest boxes are good nest boxes for bluebirds, especially some are specialized for other birds, and then some are purely aesthetic, especially ones that you might see in stores. So we've got a few here in front of us. Make sure, well, there's where it is. Right, so we've got a few here. We've got the Petersons. It's a really popular nest box for bluebirds. Gilbertson. This is the design on the North American bluebird site. And then this is where what we're calling the Florida Bluebird Society design. They were donated to us for this project. And all of these designs have a couple of things in common that are really important. And probably the most important thing is the hole that bluebirds are going to enter into the nest box. This hole needs to be 1.5 inches in diameter and no larger than 1 9/16 inches in diameter. So it's got to be big enough for bluebirds to come in, but it can't be too big. If it's too big, then starlings will come into these nest boxes and kick out the bluebirds. It's also important with nest boxes to have the box has got to be relatively watertight. You want to be able to keep water and rain out of the nest box. But even then, you still want to have or drainage holes in the bottom of the nest box so that any materials or water can drain out. And then you'll also want to have ventilation holes in the side to keep air moving through the box. Now, if you're going to use wood, and all of these boxes have at least a little bit of wood on them, you want to make sure that you're using untreated wood, especially on the inside. The chemicals involved in treating or painting wood can be dangerous for bluebirds on the inside of the nest. Now, on the outside, you can treat them with a water sealer or a light colored paint. As long as it's light colored, you don't want anything too dark because that's going to increase the temperature inside these nest boxes. Now, there's a couple other features, and they definitely differ between these nest boxes. The roof, you want the roof to be larger than the nest box so it can overhang on multiple sides, and that helps, again, protect the nest box from water and weather, and it also helps reduce the heat that's coming in on the top. Now, at the bottom of the nest box, you see we've got a couple of different sizes, right? We've got the Gilbertsons, pretty small at bottom, and then we've got the Florida Bluebird Society design and the North American Bluebird Society design. So when we're thinking about the bottom of the nest box, you want it to be big enough that they can build that cup-shaped nest in the bottom of it, but you don't want it too big, because if it's too big, then the female is just going to keep filling it up, that bottom up, with nesting material, and it's wasted effort. Now, one of the other important things with these nest boxes is, let me see, if you want to be able to access them for cleaning and monitoring. So they have to be able to open at least on one side. Now, the other important thing when you're putting up a nest box is to have some sort of predator guard. There's a couple of different designs shown in these pictures. So we've got a PVC baffle, we've got a cone, and we used cones to protect our bird feeders when I was living in Ontario. And then you've got, well, I've got some stovepipe baffle here as well. That's what we're going to be using for our project here. And if these, so the baffle and the cone, they're used to prevent predators from climbing up the pole that the nest box is mounted on. So things like snakes and raccoons, they're deterrents to that because often they can't get past that. However, occasionally there are predators that are successfully getting past the baffles, and for additional protection, you can deploy a wire mesh cage like this one, or like in these Florida Bluebird societies, a little extra block here on the front, as long as the hole, the entrance hole is the same size. And what that basically is preventing and helping reduce is predators either hanging out from above or below into the nest. Now, when deploying nest boxes in habitat that's going to be good for bluebirds, so that's area with open ground, you don't want it to be too near trees because then you might end up attracting different. But you do want to have some perch areas available to them. Now, we've talked a little bit about these different designs that we've got in front of us. And the thing is these designs have different qualities and different characteristics. And those characteristics can translate into different nest success for the bluebirds. And it could be that bluebirds actually prefer one of these boxes over the other. So there's been a little bit of work done on this in Florida, but mostly in North Florida. So a study about 6 years ago out of Gainesville, and they were looking at Petersons and Gilbertsons. And what they found was that bluebirds really didn't show a preference for these two, but bluebirds, the temperature inside these boxes were different. The Petersons were hotter, and nest success rate was a little bit lower, and growth rate was a little bit lower in the Petersons than the Gilbertsons. So that's important, and it's important for two reasons. One, we want to have a nest box deployed that's going to be the best for bluebirds, but we also don't want to deploy a nest box. So, and not wanting to deploy a nest box that is not good for them, but the bluebirds themselves weren't really able to perceive the differences in these nest boxes. They nested in both of them just as readily. So we don't want to put a nest box out there that's functioning like an ecological trap. So the research that we're going to do here at the Range Cattle REC is we're going to compare not the Petersons, because we know that's not good for Florida, it's too hot. We're going to look at the Gilbertsons, the Florida Bluebird Society, and the North American Bluebird Society. And we're going to ask a couple of different questions. We're going to ask, do bluebirds have a preference between these three nest box designs, not the Peterson? And is temperature different within the different designs? Once the nest is in the box, how does temperature change across those different designs? And is nest success different with different designs? And then is predation different? So predators are using a lot of different cues to find nest boxes, right? They're using smell, sound, and sight. But perhaps some of these designs appear more attractive to predators, perhaps not. And perhaps some of these designs protect the nest and the nestlings better than others. So we're going to look at that as well. So I'm just checking here. Checking the questions. Look like Bethany has covered them. I totally agree with her answers. So the research we're going to be doing here at the Range Cattle, we've pre-selected 20 sites in our pastures and fields here. And we're going to put one of each of these nest boxes out at each of the 20 sites. So we're going to have 6 nest boxes. We're going to space them out about 30 meters from each other. They're all going to be set up in the same way, facing the same direction. And once we find a bluebird pair building a nest within a box, we're going to come out, we're going to put a temperature button with an eye button that specifies a thumbnail inside the nest box underneath the nesting material. It's going to record temperature every 5 minutes for about 3 weeks. And we're also going to set up a game camera about 6 feet away from the nest box, pointed at the nest box. And that game camera is going to record any predation attempts. So record if snakes tried to climb up, or raccoons, or any sort of avian predator. And we're going to report the occupancy and the number of eggs laid. We're going to monitor these nests. Once the nest has been made, we're going to monitor these nests daily. And we're going to count the number of eggs that have been laid. We're going to monitor chick growth rates and the number of fledglings as well. And as I said earlier, we'll monitor predation using the game cameras. So we're hoping this research will be useful for folks in Florida that are setting out nest boxes, because, and for ourselves as well, because we're going to hopefully continue bluebird research here at the Range Cattle REC for the next few years. Once we figure out the best design to use, we're going to deploy that design, but then do manipulative studies in terms of cattle grazing and grazing intensity to look at how things like that impact bluebirds and bluebirds' reproductive success. So this is just a, as we end here, sort of a look forward to the other sessions that we're going to be having on the Bluebird Watcher program. And first thing, just ignore this time. The times are always going to be 1 to 2. That's a mistake for the talk. But our next section is going to be a series of videos on how to construct a nest box. We're going to be pre-recording those videos and posting them on December 12th. And then in January, we're going to have some videos and some talks about deploying nest boxes and doing a wildlife tour here at the REC. And so we're going to take cameras out, video cameras out into the field with us as we're deploying these nest boxes. We're going to talk about how it's done and tips and tricks with their deployment. And then starting in February, March, and April, we'll have sessions where we're actually doing nest box checks and monitoring the eggs, the chicks, and the fledglings. And we'll talk a bit more about bluebird ecology and diet and the role of different birds in rangeland systems. And then finally in May, we'll be taking some of our nest boxes down and demonstrating how to clean them out and prepare them and keep them ready to go for the season. And then in June, hopefully we'll be discussing our research results. So that pretty much wraps up what I wanted to talk about today. So I'm going to just see if there's any questions here. So how close can you mount boxes next to each other? Well, we're going to use about 30 meters apart from the nest boxes. You can be closer, especially if your goal is to maybe provide a nest box for some swallows or some other species and also bluebirds. But we're going to space them out at least 30 meters. We have a suspicion that at some of these sites, we're going to have multiple pairs of bluebirds, and we don't want them really competing against each other. I'm going to look at the other questions that Bethany answered. I'm not sure if everyone can see the answers. So one person had said that they have the extended roof over the entrance. That's the Florida Bluebird design. And that's to prevent crows from picking off the chicks, right? And hopefully we'll capture some nice evidence of that with the game cameras, right? So the crows can only perch here. They are too far away to get into that entrance hole. So that is one of the novel designs of that. I totally agree. And let's see, I use Vaseline on the middle pole for regular feeders with great success. And that's an option for bluebirds as well. In fact, some of the researchers they use Vaseline and as anti-predation technique. And we thought about that.
Sorry, I'm right in the middle of doing a webinar. Oh, I'm sorry. No, you're fine. I just got things.
Okay, let's see. What is the suggested distance between nesting boxes? So 30 meters is what we're using. You'll see different things, but that's what we're going to use. Now, our sites, the actual 20 sites, they're spaced out even more. They're at least 120 meters, I think, if not more, in most cases from each other. At our local extension, they have the 4-H club making Peterson's boxes. Why not have them make the newer style? I don't know. You can send me more info about that, and I can talk to them. We're only invited to virtual participant biologists and the opportunity to visit REC at some time, please. Oh, sorry. You know what? Anyone that wants to visit the REC can contact me. Obviously, there's COVID restrictions right now and things like that. But, you know, you've got my email address. We love having visitors out here. We can do things some way, somehow. Sorry. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so looks like there's a few others that I haven't seen. So you don't need to remove nesting materials between nestings. That might end up disrupting the pair more than the value. The females, bluebirds especially, and I think the males maybe as well, will do sort of their own cleaning effort. They'll brush around in that nesting material, trying to remove lice and different parasites and things. And if they think that nest is not usable for the next nesting, they can create a whole new nest on their own. Let's see if there was anything else. It looks like maybe there's another way I can see some questions here.
Mine's white.
So, oh, yeah. So anything you can do to prevent starlings? Well, the biggest way to prevent starlings is the entrance hole to the nest box, right? As long as that's not larger than 1 9/16 an inch, then starlings can't get in. And let's see, keeping those nest boxes cooler. So important things to keep them cooler is make sure you have ventilation. All of these boxes and all of these designs do have ventilation. Having a larger roof helps. Making sure that you're not using any sort of sealant or paint that makes it darker will help keep them cool as well. You can also place them, especially in Florida, you might want to think about the position of the afternoon sun, and you can put nest boxes in shade for the birds as well, and that'll help keep them a little bit cooler too.
Yeah, or you can set them up here. Yeah, no problem at all.
Okay.
You too.
There. Bethany was having to deal with a little bit of stuff out there. What about applying roof tilings to the top? You'll see that sometimes where different people have put an extra tile on top of the roof and leaving some airflow space so that roof tile absorbs a lot of the heat and it isn't so direct on top of the box. That could certainly reduce heat in the boxes. That might be things to look at in a follow-up study, some of these sort of specialized options. There's a couple different manufacturers of the temperature buttons. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the ones that we're going to be using for the study. Bethany might know. I don't know if she's still on the air though. Oh, so Bethany, yeah, she's chiming in. We're going to use iButton. All right. I'll stick on here for a few more minutes if there's any other questions. But otherwise, thank you all for coming. We're real excited to take you on this journey for our research and have you along, I guess, for the journey. We're pretty excited about this program. We're hoping, as we said, that this is sort of the kickoff to further Bluebird research here at the center, but also a kickoff sort of extension and video outreach program for different wildlife. We might, at some point in the future, do some kestrel boxes, maybe do some bat boxes as well. A peeper camera. All right, I'll look into that. Thank you. I know we were thinking about mirrors as well, especially for the Gilbertson. It is important that we don't disturb the boxes too much. We don't want to cause the bluebirds to abandon the box, and that's an important thing if you're monitoring. If you got your own Bluebird nest box and nest box trails, the reason we're doing this is for scientific research. We wouldn't want to be regularly in the box. And if you missed the first part of this talk, we are going to be posting online probably on Monday. We'll trim it up and then post it online, so it'll be accessible to other folks. If you know of other people that are interested in joining us on this program, even if they didn't catch this seminar, we're going to leave registration open. So it's a bit complex how we're doing the registration, and it's just so that we can keep track of who's participating and sending out the videos and files and stuff. So we're requesting people register on Eventbrite, and then they'll receive emails to register for the webinars to go to. So yeah, if you know of other folks, they can always join, even if it's mid-program. We want as many people as possible to get stuff out of it. All righty. I think that's about it. I don't see any other questions. So really great. Thank you all for attending. I'm gonna cut us off here.